Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now we have scarcity, which is basically the inability of limited resources to satisfies people unlimited wants and needs. We know that the overall goal within economics is how do we make people better off, individual and societal welfare, wealth, satisfaction, happiness. How do we do this? Now, this whole class has been about the process, both as an individual in markets and systemically about how to do this. But then how do we actually measure whether we're doing this okay? I mean, I guess we can look at the surface and say, oh, look, people are better off. They're not living paycheck to paycheck. They're able to enjoy kind of the good life and have income on stuff that they want, not just what they need. But we need some statistic to like compare different areas around the world, different regions, and see whether or not comparatively we're doing pretty well. And we do this by looking at economic growth. And the primary driver of economic growth is the production of goods and services. Because if we know there's a lot of goods and services being produced, then we know there has to be a desire for those goods and services. So there's got to be income out there. And if more people are buying goods and services, that means there are more jobs that are going into the labor market because you need more people to produce more goods and services. And a circular flow churns and works and churns and works. So what we look at is economic growth, and what we notice is that in countries with higher economic growth, people are wealthier, people are happier, people live longer, people have cleaner forests, cleaner water, cleaner air. They have better overall measurements of living. So, how do we measure economic growth? Well, we do this by measuring what's called the gross domestic product. The gross domestic product is the market value of all new goods and services produced in a country in a year. This measures the economic health of an economy, of a country, okay? The economic health of a country. And the formula for gross domestic product, GDP, is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So let's go through these parts individually one by one. Remember, this is the market value of all new goods and services produced in a country. Okay. Number one, consumer spending. This is otherwise known as consumption. This is when buyers buy. That's it. And it represents 2/3 of the entire gross domestic product of a country. 2/3 of the market value of all goods and services produced comes from people buying stuff, goods and services. Now, where does that take place? Well, we know that takes place in the product market. Households go to businesses, they exchange their money for goods and services. And if that is going and going and going and going, the economic growth of a country is going up and up and up. So, this is the primary driver. This is why, when we really look at things in the economy, people talk about consumer spending, or are people feeling good about the economy? Because when they feel good, then they go out there and they buy and they spend. When people are feeling poorly, or they're not spending, or they're hiding their money under their mattress or whatever, that's a bad sign for the economy overall. Consumers aren't spending. So consumer spending is the C. So we get to I here. I is investments. These are large purchases by businesses or by consumers buying like a home. Okay. But mostly it's large, what are known as capital, physical capital purchases by businesses. Things like stuff that's actually going to be around for a while, whether it's a building or big equipment, like a big computer system, things that show that you're expanding as a business and you have some staying power for a long time. You're investing in your own business with large purchases. And of course, on circular flow, if this is occurring here, it's usually a sign then that that business thinks good things are going to happen going forward. So this thing is going to even turn faster and faster and faster and faster. Because if I'm expanding my business, it means that I have faith on something going on going forward is good. I'm investing for something good to happen in the future. And a lot of people look at that and say, well, that's pretty good. That means there's economic growth happening. Now, the next one is G. G is government spending. And I want you to note here, government spending means the government has to buy something. It's not the government giving out a payment to individuals. So, what it is not is it's not Social Security, it's not Medicaid, it's not Medicare, it's not welfare payments or SNAP or WIC or any of those unemployment insurance, none of that stuff. What it is the government buying goods and services. And we see that when we threw in the government here in circular flow. and the government in the product market. So the government goes to businesses and buys goods and services, whether it's airplanes or police cars or fire hoses or jets or aircraft carriers or desks for the classroom. This computer you're on, this came from the government and the businesses making an exchange in the product market. The school bought a Dell laptop from whatever manufacturer it did. That becomes part of GDP, but it becomes government spending because the government spent the money for it. Okay. And then finally, net exports. This is your exports minus your imports. So an export is a good or service that we send to other countries. So we send a lot of raw materials to other countries, a lot of food. We are the number one seller of oil in the world. Imports are goods and services we bring in from other countries. So a lot of computers, a lot of clothing comes from other countries. Some cars, most of your appliances actually come from other countries. Video games, video game consoles. Okay. Now, when you throw all of this together, consumer spending plus investments plus government spending plus net exports, now we have a number, an actual number that says, hey, where's your economic growth at compared to everybody else? Now, that economic growth goes up or down over time. This is economic growth on this vertical axis. This is time on a horizontal axis. So what we see is actually what's known as the business cycle. And a business cycle is just basically economic growth ebbs and flows over time. So we start here with economic growth. This is when circular flow is running really well. People are buying goods and services. They're investing in their companies. Exports are a little bit on the rise. And then eventually prices, of course, go up along with that because demand goes up, price goes up, and eventually you hit a peak up here. And then economic growth because prices get a little too high, people's wages don't rise to match. Then, of course, they hold off on buying things. Circular flow starts to slow down. Then, of course, you start to see layoffs of employees. That means less wages. Circular flow slows down some more because we're not buying as much. You got to lay off more employees. That means there's going to be less wages out there, less money for goods and services, and on. And you go through what's called a recession. That's when you have negative economic growth for 2 quarters. That's half of a year. If you have negative economic growth, negative GDP for 2 quarters, one half of a year, that's called a recession. And eventually, when you go through a recession, recessions can be very short, like 6 months. They could be really, really long. Like the Great Depression is basically a super long recession that happened almost, basically over a decade. Eventually, the prices get really low. Wages start to catch up a little bit, and then people are like, cool, I'm going to buy some more. Let's do it. The prices are nice and low. And then circular flow gets going again, and you get economic growth. And then, of course, you hit a peak and it trends down. And this happens over time. But what you want, notice this trend line. We know it's going to do this. What we want to happen is that it kind of just mellows and slowly rises upwards. That's what we're looking. We're looking for that trend line to even though we know it's going to go up and down, but always kind of trend up in a diagonal way for positive economic growth overall and not have very many or very deep recessions. So here's what the US economic growth looks like since 1950. This is in trillions of dollars. So this is 32 trillion, 28 trillion, 24 trillion, and 20 trillion. And then, of course, notice economic growth over time has always trended up. Now, each of these shaded areas are recessions. So this is when there's negative economic growth. So if you look right here, notice this area right here, this is the Great Recession. This is in 2007, 2008, 2009. Notice there's a downturn in economic growth. That was pretty significant. It's the worst downturn since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Then you have up here the next downturn in economic growth, really sharp, really huge. This is the pandemic in 2020, but notice it bounced immediately back out. So we basically barely felt that. And then you have that GDP growth is just going nuts now. Now, how good is it compared to the other countries around the world? Here is the GDPs of the top six countries in the world: the United States, China, Japan, India, Germany, and the United Kingdom. Okay. Notice over time, one country dominates other countries in terms of GDP growth, and that is the United States of America. So, the United States of America, really nice and high here in terms of GDP growth. Here, of course, we have our uh, the COVID pandemic, but then we just shot right out of it. A place like China, COVID has made their GDP go flat and start to trend downwards. It means they're not really growing. They actually might be going backwards. Then look at Japan, and the most populous country in the world is India, but their GDP is really quite low. Germany, not that high. United Kingdom, not that high. So we are the largest economy on the planet, and it's not even really close at all. We have some of the best standard of living on the planet. Do we have problems? Absolutely. There's problems as we've seen before, with healthcare. We have issues of income inequality, but still, comparatively, we are far better off economically than most countries. FYI, you want to hear a fun fact? If we were to take the United States and just say, okay, what if we actually just focused on California? Where would California be on this list right here in terms of GDP? And the answer is California would be between India and Germany alone. It has the fifth largest gross domestic product in the world. It is economically that powerful as a state. Okay, so C plus I plus G plus X minus M. We have consumer spending, government spending, investments, and net exports. That equals GDP. That measures economic health.